I became acquainted with Dr. Louise Hutchins first through her husband Francis. At the time that I met both of them, Dr. Francis Hutchins had retired as president of Berea College, and I was working with his father's papers in the archives. And I had occasion to meet his wife, Louise, and Dr. Louise was interested in me because I was an Episcopalian, and her father had been the Episcopal Bishop of Hankow in China during the, well, for many, many years prior to the Japanese invasion of that country. And so she told me wonderful stories about her father in China, and this friendship, our friendship grew from this interest in Episcopal Church history. And as we became neighbors over time after her husband Francis died, and we got to know each other in a personal way. And her stories about growing up in China as a young girl and traveling back and forth between the United States and China, and the emergence of her commitment to health for women was just a wonderful story, and it was a privilege for me to hear this from her directly, as well as to read about it in the papers that she was passing along to the archives, because she would just wander in sometimes and would say, well, I don't know if this is important, but I thought you should at least look at it. And of course we would immediately file it away because it was a treasure, and it was just a bit of an insight into her as a person. She was really very open about her work and very direct about it.
I leave the house at 7:30 in the morning when I don't leave at 7:15. And I meet my wonderful nurse driver downtown, and we then drive anywhere up to 2 hours. And then we arrive, say, at Hazard or Breathitt, and we can tell somewhat by whether we can park there or not, how big the crowd is, also how many women are standing outside.
It's known in advance that you're coming to a certain point.
Yes, it's all prepared by the nurses in the department. And some of the days, like when 81 women are there at Breathitt County waiting for us, why, it's a little frightening to go in and see all these women, even though we go there 3 times a month. And like today, I had 23 women in McKee this morning and 17 women in a little mobile unit in Sand Gap, which is just a spot in the road, you know.
In 1935 or 1936, Dr. Charles Gamble of what would become Procter & Gamble was very interested in testing contraceptives and worked with nurses through the Mountain Maternal Health League beginning in 1936. The Mountain Maternal Health League had already established itself in Berea at that time, and there were 2 nurses that began taking this test gel into the mountains, and they documented over 500 cases in between 1936 and 1937. When Dr. Hutchins came to Berea in 1939, she joined with the Mountain Maternal Health League as a volunteer physician. And in 1944, a clinic was established at the Berea Hospital to begin a process by which women and children were counseled in child-rearing practices and health, during pregnancy, before pregnancy, and after pregnancy. Dr. Hutchins was accompanied during these travels by several nurses, and in the last 16 years of her career, there was one nurse named Pat Jones who would take Dr. Hutchins to the various clinics that were being established in the mountains. And Dr. Hutchins often spoke highly of Pat Jones and her work, and Pat Jones herself is very much part of this important crusade in the mountains for better health for mountain mothers.
I drove the car, and we took her car most of the time until all of a sudden I said, would it be all right to take my car? I've got air conditioning. So then we started driving my car. But I drove her to the clinics, and then I just helped her in the clinic room as a nurse, assisted her in the clinic room. And so I got to learn more about contraceptives too. We had many exciting trips. We got showered down with gravel when they were cutting back on one of the cuts between Mount Vernon and beyond Mount Vernon. And the bulldozer pulled some rocks over and they came clumping down on us, but she was bound and determined to go on to work, and so the men there took us on to work in Manchester, and then one of the administrators at Manchester brought us back there, and they said they had checked the car out and it was okay to drive, and but we needed to get the radiator fixed because one had punctured the radiator, one of the rocks, and it had hit the windshield, but not completely shattered it, so he couldn't see. So anyway, everybody was grateful that she was there. It was just, I don't know, and you could see it just in their actions. And they would just many times say that if they, I guess they wouldn't have been up so early in the morning if it hadn't been that they were coming to see her, and the fact that she was available to them and talked to them, told them how it is. She didn't mince any words.
And she was quite matter of fact about it, and she was really apparently fearless from what I understand in terms of her relationships with men in the mountains who were naturally suspicious about all this.
And they've always been there wanting it.
Yes.
Nobody is not wanted except some of the husbands. And we know how to get around them, one liberated woman to another, you know.
Dr. Hutchins, naturally going into the mountains with this information about child spacing, not only required quite a bit of determination and courage on her part, because she was speaking to a community that was understandably suspicious of outsiders. And she was advocating a practice which, even in national terms, was not necessarily popular.
15 years ago, the State Department of Health at Boone Tavern said I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. And, I mean, the Welfare Department was frightened to send people to us. And we finally broke down these challenges, and we sort of penetrated, bootlegged through, and then in Madison County, I was chairman of the board, and I persuaded the board it was all right to carry a few supplies, and then little by little, some of the women health officers bootlegged supplies out to Knott County, and then finally, Dr. Teague said it was all right if we didn't talk about it or get it in the press in 1962, and then in '64, Dr. Dayhue, who was with the health department, came on our board. And little by little, I had health officers on my board, and the thing got more and more. And then finally, we gave a speech at Roanoke, Virginia, to the first HEW conference. And they said, they had me tell what I'd been doing, and they said, go and do likewise. Well, everything was wide open then. And I gave the first speech ever given to the Kentucky Medical Association on the subject of contraception in 1967 before I went to Hong Kong.
In Louisville, am I right?
Yes, it's only less than it's 8 years ago.
There are letters that we have in the Mount Maternal Health League archives that document the fact that if it were not, that they felt that they would not be alive if it hadn't been for Dr. Hutchins working with them.
I have seen in the 5 years since I came back from Hong Kong over 25,000 women. And I have seen this year 6,583 women. And that is, you know, a few women to lay your hands on. And all the way from the 13-year-old who got to you before she got pregnant to the 45-year-old who has just had her 15th child and had one before 16 months before, you know. And so it's just the most rewarding thing what the federal funds, the state funds, and the regional funds have been able to do to expend this dream of mine to reach the mountain women of Kentucky. There's nothing that makes a woman happier than to be needed. And I can't imagine anything more needed than this, and the women tell it to you day after day after day. Sure. And I say, well, as long as I can crawl out of bed, I'm going to keep going.
That'll be a long time.